Hi, this is John. You are listening to Jeff and Bryan, and digital watches are a pretty neat idea. It's not as interesting as me telling squirrel stories, but really, what is?
Hello, this is Jeff. This is part 2 of our discussion about the book Mostly Harmless. The original episode Bryan and I recorded went way longer than I hoped. I knew it was going to be one of our longer episodes, but I did not expect it to approach 2.5 hours. The decision was made to break it into 2 parts like we did with Doctor Who and the Cricket Men. If you have not yet listened to part 1, I do recommend that you go back and listen to that episode first. But right now, we will be discussing the second half of Mostly Harmless after a message from one of our proud sponsors.
Head to the outer eastern rim of the galaxy, to the planet Hawalius, where wisdom and truth are to be found. Here you will find oracles, seers, and soothsayers, and also takeaway pizza shops. You can visit the village of prophets who will prophesize for you from small wooden benches, or you can visit the village of oracles. The friendly local inhabitants will be glad to share with you the knowledge and wisdom of the ancients. Peer with them into the swirling mysteries of past and future time, or just receive some sort of general advice on what to do with your life. Remember, the quality of any advice anybody has to offer has to be judged against the quality of life they actually lead. Choose your sage carefully. You can also visit the village of extremely high poles. Meet with the old men who sit atop them. Closed during the winter months. Just because they sit up poles for most of their lives doesn't mean they're idiots. It is here you will learn about boundary conditions, where land meets water, where earth meets air, where body meets mind, where space meets time, where one can be on one side and look at the other. If you come for advice but can't cope with anything you don't recognize, you will be told something you already know, but it will be made to sound like news. Many of the pieces of wisdom you will find here are also available for purchase at the Spaceport gift shop. They've got racks of the stuff. On Thursdays, buy 1 single topping pizza and get a second for 50% off.
Part 3. Ford took the black disc that was the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Mark II, and mailed it. Since he needed to escape the building and all the exits were blocked, Ford decided to test his luck one more time and jumped out the window. A spaceship arrived on the remote planet of Lemuela, to the surprise of the inhabitants and their spiritual leader, Old Thrashbarg. A woman and a girl emerged from the ship, looked around, ignored everybody, and then set off for the last hut on the left, the hut of the sandwich maker, out of which singing could be heard. The sandwich maker is one of the most beloved people in the entire village. He arrived from the sky in a fiery crash. The place where he crashed is now said to be haunted. He makes sandwiches out of perfectly normal beast, which is an animal that, twice a year, suddenly appear on one end of a plane, run across it, and then suddenly disappear on the other side. Standing in the entry to the sandwich maker's hut, Trillian said, "Hello, Arthur." After a bit of small talk and some catching up, Trillian introduced Arthur to his daughter, Random. Trillian decided she wanted to have a child and went to a DNA bank to have a kid at random. However, there was only one compatible DNA match, and that was Arthur, who used the sale of his DNA to survive. Trillian left Random with Arthur and left to cover a war. With all of the amazing technology Random was surrounded by, it was a thing like Arthur's self-winding watch that fascinated her. She was jealous of it because there was somewhere it belonged, and she felt she did not belong anywhere. She also had to know how it worked. She opened the watch to figure it out, but could not get it back together. She was very sorry and said she would get it repaired. The package that Ford had the security drone mail was delivered to Arthur. Random wanted to open the package, and Arthur told her no, because anything to do with Ford Prefect is bound to be bad and worrying. Random took the package when she had the chance and made her way in the dark and in the rain to the haunted forest where Arthur's ship crashed. As she neared the location of the crashed ship, she encountered squirrel-like animals, which brought her acorn cups and scraps of cloth and paper. She also encountered holographic projections of the in-flight entertainment. When she arrived at the ship, she found her father's copy of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Then she opened the package. Inside was the smooth, black disc Ford found on the 13th floor of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. The black disc cracked and unfolded into the shape of a bird. After calibrating itself, it told Random it is the guide, and in her universe, it is her guide. It also gave her a lesson in perception, using projections of her father and Tricia McMillan, an extent of her mother on the probability axis. She was also shown an image of the planet Earth, which turned into a string of sausages. The guide asked Random if she wanted to go see it for herself. Using reverse engineering, the guide provided a ship to take her to Earth. The occupant of the ship saw Random with the guide and started to run toward her. The ship was gone by the time Arthur got to the crash site. All he found was his copy of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and Ford Prefect, who had been knocked unconscious by a rock.
We're going to jump now back to Arthur, because he found a place that he was happy, he was revered, and he was the sandwich maker.
I laugh because I think of my, I haven't traveled all that much, but everything I've ever heard of English food is just that it's awful. So I can't even imagine there being someone in England that could make a good sandwich.
The food in England is not awful. It is just not typical to what we have here.
Yep, I can see that.
So I like English food. When I was over in, I actually went to Scotland, but I did traveled through England to get to Scotland. All the food over, it's heavy and rich and all of that. And if you don't like things made out of blood, well, you're kind of out of luck. But I loved it all.
Good. Well, see, I have to travel more so I can have my own opinion.
Yes. Arthur has found this planet. He's very happy, but nothing can stay nice.
No.
Because Trillian arrives, tells him he has a daughter, dumps her on him, and leaves.
Oh, yeah. And what's the best part of that? Her name is Random.
Her name is Random.
Nothing like having a random child out in the universe somewhere.
Here is another one of those similarities. So the book states about Trillian, when she arrived at the village where Arthur is, it says that now this woman had just arrived out of nowhere. The sandwich maker's fame had obviously spread, though it is hard to know where, since according to Old Thrashbarg, there wasn't anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
Put a dust cloud around that and you've got cricket.
Yeah. Exactly.
So like you mentioned, Trillian's daughter's name is Random.
Mm-hmm.
And we learned earlier that she wanted to have a child at random. And so it leads me to believe that Trillian had the name picked out, boy or girl. And we know that Arthur was supplementing his income by visiting DNA banks all the time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so when Trillian went, she really only had one choice. So really not that random.
Right.
But I really found it funny that she called him a frequent flyer.
Yep, yep. And you know what's funny too? This is one of those things that there are certain pieces of information that just stuck in my head when I went through these books originally. And another piece was right here when they reintroduced Trillian.
Mm-hmm.
And they say that she's wearing Rimplon.
Yes.
And I know I brought that up before, but I didn't realize it was all the way in this book before they introduced the idea of Rimplon.
Oh, the clothing that looks its best when it's all wrinkly.
Yes, exactly. And for some reason, that just really appealed to me. You know what?
Well, you did a lot of traveling at the time.
Yeah, we were doing a lot of traveling, and I like terry cloth, so maybe that's it. Uh-oh, exposing real truths here.
Yes.
Jeff's like, what the hell is he talking about again?
Just keep that rope closed. So, in my opinion, presenting Arthur with and leaving him a daughter that he did not know he had, right after saying, "It is time for you to take responsibility," is a pretty bitch thing to do.
I know, but it is the ineffable will of Bob, so what are you going to do?
So now Ford has come across the new version of the guide. Do you want to talk about the bird?
Sure. So, as Ford is clinging to the ledge of the window outside the 13th floor, he realizes that he sees something inside the window. He can't define it, but it's flapping around in there, as he says.
Right.
And then he manages, by the use of his credit card, to pry open the window and get inside.
Right.
That's where he first encounters the guide Mark II.
Correct.
I do love the humor here. He goes through, he finds the box, and he opens up the box, and inside the box are the pieces of missing matter.
Yes, yes. Yes, this is his second styrofoam peanut joke of his series.
So I do love that part. And of course, when he finally pulls out this saucer-shaped object, the first words he sees appearing on the surface are panic.
Panic, yes.
Because you know bad things are about to happen.
Right. Right, exactly.
And I tell you, the whole concept of the Mark II guide is fascinating. Frightening.
Yes.
But fascinating.
So now that Ford has this new version of the guide, he's trying to escape the Vogons.
Mm-hmm.
And he has to get rid of it.
Right.
So he packages it up, gives the package to the security robot, and mails it.
Right. I actually love that whole scene, and this is where the nested parentheses start to close, because as you said, the whole concept of the Mark II guide is this concept of reverse temporal engineering.
Yes.
So even though for us in the story, this is the first encounter that Ford has had with the guide,
right,
the guide has already been acted for his benefit to create the scenarios that allowed him to get there.
But what we'll find out later when Ford is talking to Arthur about that, you only think the guide is acting for your benefit.
Right, right.
But if you go far enough, you realize that he had to get through all of this in order for the guide to get to Random, to get to the Earth.
Right.
So even though it seems like it's working out for him, it's really working for someone else. He's just the beneficiary, like I said, until he's not.
You're right. And this is where the concept comes back again, that this is the guide in Ford's universe. So Ford's universe and his perception of the guide starts here.
Right.
And he thinks that he then is the owner of the guide because it has come into his universe. But as you said, in another universe, we learn later that the guide has already been introduced and directed.
Yes. Well, this is where Ford has found a way to replace the Identities card in that guy's pocket.
Right.
He has been astounded at how everything has gone so smoothly, no matter how reckless he has been, and everything has worked out. So he decides to test his luck, and he jumped out of the window again.
Mm-hmm.
The first time out the window, he did not have the guide in his possession.
No, he did not.
But everything still worked out swimmingly.
Right.
He's projecting that the guide is helping him, but it's not. So some time has passed, and we go to the planet that Arthur is on, and Random is able to watch Subetha TV on her wrist device.
Right.
And the villagers are in awe of the moving images on her wrist. So Adams had a little bit to say about pop culture here.
Yes.
The villagers had only ever seen one spaceship crash, and it had been so frightening, violent, and shocking, and had caused so much horrible devastation, fire, and death that stupidly they had never realized it was entertainment.
Yeah, I love that.
So
that's great.
It's perfect. I mean, it sums up in one sentence everything about modern movies and television shows.
Mm-hmm.
The devil didn't realize that was all entertainment, but it is.
Right. That's right.
So now there's a real part that's hard to swallow here, and it's crucial to the story, but really flies in the face of the entire series of books.
Okay.
Arthur's having his heart-to-heart with Random, and she points at something and says, "What's that?" And it's his self-winding watch.
Right.
What?
We thought he had a digital watch, didn't
Yes.
we? Well, everybody has more than one watch. Right?
Yeah, but he didn't pick it up anywhere else. He said he got this one from Earth.
Right.
And when he was going through the countdown of improbability after coming back on the guide and his arms were floating away, he's like, how am I going to work my digital watch? So but that was a different universe in this.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know how digital watch could be such. We have to rename our podcast. Self-winding watches are a pretty neat idea.
Oh, I don't know about that. Self-winding watches are a pain in the butt.
Yes.
My son owns one, and that's what they do with the upper scale ones. But when he takes it off at night, he actually puts it onto this little, like,
a shaker.
What you call? Well, it's a kind of like shaker. It actually kind of rotates the whole watch around. So
you don't need any batteries. You just need a whole nother device.
Yeah, exactly. It sits on there all night and kind of woo.
Right, to keep it winding. Yeah. So you don't have to reset it in the morning because it died. Yes.
Oh, gosh. The convenience of inconvenience. Huh?
Exactly.
Hey, you know what? I just thought of something.
Okay.
Maybe Arthur switched his watch when he went back to Earth and found Friendchurch.
Oh, that could be. He could, yes. Because the battery had died on his digital watch.
Uh-huh.
And he didn't want it to die again, so he got a self-winder. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Hey.
All right,
we
look at
came up
this.
with our own solution, didn't we?
Yes, headcanon. Here we go.
Oh, sorry about that, bud.
No, that was perfect. That makes sense because he was back on Earth for that time, and he could have mentioned it, though.
Yeah. That'd be handy. You keep ignoring the ineffable will of Bob.
I haven't been ignoring it necessarily. I just don't know. I don't bring up the ineffable will of Bob for a while. So if you want to talk about the ineffable, I don't have anything to say about it now. But if you've got a piece that I've missed, please. No, you can insert it here. But let me get about Random first.
Oh, gosh. Don't tell me what I can insert and when.
Well.
Oh, gosh.
Anyway.
Trouble coming.
The self-winding watch was only the first part of this unfortunate paragraph.
Mm-hmm.
He's having this heart-to-heart with Random, and she's asking, like, where did you come from? And he said, we evolved on the Earth from, I don't know, some kind of sludge or something. He did not say the Gulgafrinchans.
Yeah, I figured that was going to come up.
So, like I posited in the episode about Life, the Universe, and Everything, where the book implied all the Gulgafrinchans died out and the original native prehistoric people survived, is now what happened.
In this universe, you are correct, sir.
Yes.
Oh, gosh.
Random ran away from Arthur in a fit because he didn't understand her, and she went to his hut, and she eventually gets his watch, and she's taking it apart to see how it works and fits together, and she couldn't get it back together, and that must have freaked her out, and she probably had another fit. When Arthur gets back to the village, everybody in the village was nervous. So you know that Random was going through some kind of outrage.
Right. I love the way they described her as having a range of bad moods.
Yes.
And Arthur was going to love her if it killed him.
Exactly.
But what are you going to do in a fractally demented universe?
Exactly. Yeah, there's nothing else you can do. So a mysterious package arrives, addressed to Ford Prefect in care of Arthur.
Right.
Ford, totally disconnected from everybody and everything, somehow is able to address a package out of, to Arthur somewhere. I mean...
Right. To himself in care of Arthur somewhere.
Yes. Unless he was able to just give those instructions to the security robot who was able to access all the records. Because if there are records that they just ignored, that would make sense. And Random immediately wants to open it.
Right.
Because she wants something to do.
She's bored out of her mind.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And Arthur's like, no, absolutely not. It's not addressed to us. And he's a rule follower.
Right.
But Random isn't.
Right. He's also very much aware that anything that comes from Ford is going to be dangerous.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And even tells her that.
Right.
Well, she swipes the box anyway and heads off to where she knows that Arthur will not follow her. The crash site of his ship.
Right.
And then he does a really great scene of misdirection.
Mm-hmm.
So evidently, the in-flight entertainment is still operational and they're showing the movies, but we don't know that yet.
Yeah, that's cool. That was a neat scene. I like that.
So she's just walking through the woods and all of a sudden it says a man steps out of nowhere and shoots her. And then the chapter ends and it's like, I forgot about this part. Yeah. What? So it was just the in-flight movie.
Mm-hmm. And right here, right about here, is where it happens.
Well, you've lost me.
Oh, come on now. You know what happens right here. Adams finally says it. He says the word...
Belgium? Here's one thing that I find myself being... I don't want to say disappointed by, but like, because I always expect that you know exactly what I'm talking about. And like your response is never what I expect. Well, here you're experiencing it because you're throwing something to me without a good enough setup that I can figure out what you're talking about.
Well, I kind of thought you'd know because we had it when we were talking about it. We talked about his use of the word detritus. He's describing the scene. So that's what I was talking about. Yeah, it's right here where he's talking about with Random going through the forest and all the detritus. So
now what I will do is I will try and imagine what you had just said, and I'll say it here, and then we can go on. Are you talking about detritus?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Brilliant, huh?
Yeah, so the spaceship crash has everything all over.
Mm-hmm. And that's when Adam describes it as the detritus of the wreckage is all over the forest.
Yes, absolutely.
So as Random is walking through the forest, she actually finds Arthur's copy of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, his original copy.
Yes, she does.
Carries it with her.
And she wants to find a place to open the box. And so she takes the guide that she just found and the box, and she finds a cave. And she opens the box and she finds this little disc, and it starts unfolding itself. So now here you wanted to talk about the whole guide thing, right?
Right. At this point, as Random opens the box, the guide comes out of the box through the pieces of missing matter.
Right.
And it starts unfolding itself. It says like a self-opening origami.
Right.
It looks like a bird. So that's where Ford got the impression that there was a flapping item inside of the darkened 13th floor.
Right.
And I thought it was fascinating the way the book decides to calibrate itself.
Right.
Where it's talking in different tones and volumes to see how the individual who now has the book can perceive the book. And they talk a lot here about the whole sort of general mishmash and what it is.
Right.
The book actually projects into the rain images that Random can see, and she's fascinated by the technology. And this is where the book says, of course, I can perceive everything because I do not have filters.
Right.
And you have difficulty seeing things because you do have filters. And that's a fascinating concept.
Right. Absolutely. The problem with that I have had in my head is that the removal of the filters in the guide meant nothing had any size or scope. It's almost like it came into a neat little package, and and being able to see everything all at once, the guide could handle it where human beings could not. You would not be able to look at all of everything and the whole sort of general mishmash and survive in your mind, but the guide can. And so that's why it has all of these abilities.
Right.
Here, though, they do another thing that he did. Arthur did it with Random earlier, and the guide is doing it now with Random again, which is telling us really simple, basic things that I could understand how Arthur was trying to tell Random how to tell time with the big hand and the little hand.
Yep.
I didn't need a lesson on how to tell time on a watch, but I could see where Random would.
Right.
But then the guide says, you move freely in three-dimensional space with a fourth dimension of time. It's like, yeah, we all know that. I didn't understand why that needed to be. You have a hearing range between this and this and a visual range between this. It's like, yeah, we figured that out already.
Right, exactly. But I think what he's doing here, at least from the guide's perspective, is understanding the filter or the limits, if you will, for the individual that he's now destined to interact with. So it's part of the perceiving of everything that the guide has to tune itself into the understanding and existence of the individual who possesses it. So I don't feel like it's so much for us to define those spaces. It's for the guide and for us to understand that the guide sees way beyond those things.
Right.
He goes farther out than we could possibly understand or imagine, but he's trying to help say, okay, this is the limitations or these are the filters that exist in your universe.
Someday I might actually find a way that it makes sense to me and I can put it in my mind. But here's, I keep trying to think of kind of like, and none of it works. So pick any musical instrument. Just name one. Name a musical instrument.
Violin.
Violin. Okay. A violin can make a lot of sounds.
Yep.
It cannot make every sound.
No.
And it's not because it has a filter. Mm-hmm. It's because it doesn't have the capability. Mm-hmm. I don't have a filter that is preventing me from seeing the whole sort of general mishmash. It's not because I have a filter. It's because I don't have the capability. And that to me is a huge difference between what he's trying to sell me and what I believe to be the fact. Like, I don't believe I've got filters that are preventing me from seeing infrared and ultraviolet light. It's
right.
I don't have the capability.
Right. So if you, I guess I'm willing to do a little bit of interpretation when it talks about filters. The difference, I think, as what I'm understanding when we have this conversation, is that a filter is the same to me as a limitation. So the reason that the violin can't play every sound that exists is because it has a limitation.
Correct.
So, if you will, those are the brackets to which the violin can make noise. There's an end point.
You can remove a filter. You cannot remove a limitation. So a filter is an artificial limitation. Mm-hmm. Not an actual limitation.
Right.
I can put a filter on a violin that makes it incapable of playing all the sounds it plays, which is just a bar across the frets.
Right.
You can remove all of the low notes. Then you can remove it, and then it has its full capabilities, but not. So there's nothing you can remove on a violin that is going to make it be able to create every possible noise. So
right.
I don't like the word. You don't mind the word filter, and you've interpreted it in your mind.
Because I guess I've modified it in my mind. So I can see what you're saying, that the filter is probably not the right word that should be used here in defining the existence of the Mark II. I think limitation would have been a better word, because, as you said, a limitation is something you can't get past, but a filter is something you can change. So,
right.
Yeah, it would be an easier understanding of the concept to change the word from filter to limitation.
Right. Yes, you can't see it because you have limitations. I don't have any limitations. So that makes sense. So I will change the word filter to limitation, and it will help me greatly.
Well, right, yeah. And I'd say this is where I love this concept. I mean, Adams creates something that really made me think.
Right.
And you've obviously thought a lot about it too, because how long would it have taken you, or how long did it take you to understand that filter is not the right word? Because he's looking for, he's describing something that isn't exactly parallel, you know?
Right.
Just the fact that he could write a story and tell and bring up a piece of technology that can make you think about it that hard, I mean, to me, is just fascinating.
Right.
I wish I had that kind of thought processes, you know, because then maybe the fiction that I would write in some future time would actually be entertaining.
Yes.
Oh.
So Arthur has discovered that the package is gone and Random is gone, and he's asking if anybody has seen her, and I think he goes to Thrashbarg and he kind of points, and he knew that's where she would go. So he heads off through the woods to find the crash site. And when the guide is talking to Random and the guide is doing the projections in the rain, one of the projections is a giant projection of Arthur looking startled. And Arthur looked startled while he was looking at a picture of him looking startled. So I thought that was kind of funny.
Yes, it was.
And then there's another attempt at an explanation of the Earth and why it is back. It says that the Earth lies on a fault line in the landscape of probability. This means that at many probability coordinates, the whole of it simply ceases to exist. It has an inherent instability which is typical of anything that lies within what we usually designate the plural sectors.
Right.
That is why some of the sausages were missing. It does not explain why it looked like a sausage.
Well, I'm thinking about that, about why it would look like a sausage. It's curious why he describes it that way.
So anyway, we didn't mention that it looked like sausages, but when the guide was showing Random the Earth, it all of a sudden turned the Earth into a sausage and then did a chain of linked sausages with some of the sausages missing. And then it explains why that is, but I don't know why it had to be sausage shaped.
Right. So the visual that I'm getting in the description that the guide is making and showing to Random, okay? Imagine a small projection of a ball like the Earth, okay? And they're stacked up against each other. So they don't have any, like, it's not a globe and a globe and a globe, a circle, a circle, a circle. They're stacked up against each other. And then there's an occasional space where they are missing.
Okay.
So instead of looking like a whole bunch of circles, they look like a sausage and then an end, and a sausage and then an end, because they're discontinuous on that curve. Does that make sense?
So they're, for lack of better term, they're overlapped.
Yes.
Okay.
They're overlapping each other to the point where they no longer look like a globe. They look like a circle on top of a circle. And so they stretch out into what would be a sausage.
Right. Okay. I understand that.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of silly, and why he has to describe it that way, I don't know. But, he hates sausages anyway, so.
Right.
Because that takes us back to the train station.
Yeah.
And all the sins we have committed.
Right. So then the guide starts explaining to Random about temporal reverse engineering and how she can get to Earth. And she said, well, I want a spaceship. And he's like, will this one do? And a ship just appears.
Oh, yes.
Arthur gets there after the ship is gone, and we learn that Ford was on the ship, and he came trying to find his package, and he honed in on the beacon on Arthur's original guide, and that's why he landed near Random and saw that the bird was with her, so ran toward her, and she clocked him in the head with her stone and knocked him out twice.
Oh, yeah.
Part 4. Arthur explains to Ford that it was his daughter that knocked him out. Ford explained to Arthur that the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy has been bought out and created a new guide, shaped like a bird, that uses reverse temporal engineering. It has a new technology called unfiltered perception, which means it perceives everything. It doesn't have any sense filters and is present in every possible universe. Ford also explained that the marketing and accounting executives figured they only have to make one guide and then sell it an infinite number of times. The problem is that any smallest move the guide makes has the power of a virus that can propagate throughout space, time, and a million other dimensions. Ford then told Arthur about the Vogons. He also told Arthur they had to get off the planet immediately. At that moment, the spring migration of the perfectly normal beasts began. With a brightly colored floral bath towel and the help of a pick-a-bird, Arthur and Ford were able to climb on the back of a perfectly normal beast and ride it across the plain and through the portal to the domain of the king. Tricia McMillan was going through and editing the video footage she took on Rupert. None of it was usable. Because the Grebulons have lost their minds, none of the interviews could explain any of the technology. Her video footage had interference. Her film had been fogged, and what could be seen looked like a low-budget film set. When she was fed, she was given McDonald's hamburgers. She couldn't show this to anybody, or she would be a laughingstock. Even though Tricia did her best to keep all disturbances away, one message got through. An alien spacecraft landed in Regent's Park with a girl with a bird who threw rocks and wanted a watch fixed. Tricia went to the scene. When the girl saw her, she screamed, "Mother!" and threw rocks at her. Arthur and Ford jumped off the perfectly normal beast at the domain of the king bar and grill. It was in the middle of where the perfectly normal beast would be charging if they didn't take a minor trans-dimensional diversion on the way. In front of the domain of the king bar and grill was parked a pink spaceship with large fins and lots of chrome. It belonged to the singer in the bar. Using his Infinidim credit card, Ford was given the pink spaceship and requested the song "Love Me Tender" in exchange for a very large tip. They go to Earth. On the news, Arthur and Ford watch random frequent flyer Dent's altercation with Tricia McMillan. Tricia breaks down, not knowing why the girl believes her to be her mother, and leaves the studio. Ford determines Tricia will go to a club and finds the one she frequents. He and Arthur go there. On Rupert, the leader, needing to do something, ordered the great gray turrets to swivel toward Earth. The Vogon captain watched from a distance. He will be able to finally tick the box. Arthur, Ford, Trillian, Tricia, and Random are all at the club. Random is upset and is holding a gun. Trillian is trying to get Random to leave because something bad is about to happen. Arthur tells her she is safe because nothing bad can happen since he has not yet been to Stravomula Beta. A man tries to disarm Random. The gun goes off. A man is killed and stares hatefully at Arthur. He drops a book of matches with the name of the club and its proprietor. It says, "Stavro Mueller Beta." A sense of peace came over Arthur. He knew that at last, for once and forever, it was now all finally over.
Throughout this whole thing, to Random and Arthur, and now to Ford and Arthur, there have been these little squirrel-like creatures that have been bringing little bits of things. That Ford explains that the reason for the odd behavior of the squirrels is that the cyber minds that control the cabin robots of a space liner survive a crash, and they start infesting the local wildlife, turning them into some sort of service industry, handing out towels and drinks. So I thought that was pretty funny.
Yep.
When Ford told Arthur that Random hit him in the head with a rock twice, there was this foreshadowing conversation. Ford said, "Sweet kid." Arthur said, "You have to get to know her." Ford asked, "She eases up a bit, does she?" Arthur says, "No, but you get a better sense of when to duck." And we do know that Arthur learned when to duck. Coming up later. So Ford tells Arthur all about temporal reverse engineering and the guide and the Vogons. And Ford's description of the trouble with reverse temporal engineering was quite lengthy.
Yes.
And in the end, it didn't really settle on anything.
No.
My best interpretation is it's like the anti-butterfly effect.
Yes.
So with the butterfly effect, we are told not to mess with anything in the past because we have no idea what it will affect in the future. But with the guide, it knows exactly what to mess with to get the desired result. And then this is where Ford said that the people the guide are with think they are controlling the guide. And that whoever has the guide will have what could be deemed ultimate power. And the Vogons are now at the guide.
Right. Scary.
Yes. Ford says, "We have to get off this planet."
Right.
And Arthur's like, "There's no way to get off this planet."
One of the unique features of the planet that Arthur ends up on here is that there is a large migration of what they call the perfectly normal beasts.
Right.
But what's odd about the perfectly normal beasts is they appear, well, magically or automatically.
Right. From out of nowhere.
Out of nowhere, from at one end of a valley. And they disappear just as easily out of the other end of the valley.
Correct.
So they only exist within this stretch of land, and they disappear and appear going one direction in the spring and the other direction in the fall.
Correct.
And these are the animals that the people are sustained with because they manage to pull them out of the herd and kill them and cook them and eat them. And this is the meat, if you will, that Arthur uses to make his sandwiches. And
right.
This is how he becomes famous.
Yes.
For sandwich making.
Perfectly normal beast sandwiches. So the migration starts as Ford and Arthur are having this conversation because they can hear this rumbling of thunder.
Correct.
And so then, to me, it was like the Chesterfield sofa scene in Life,
yes.
Universe, and Everything.
Yes, that's exactly what it's trying to imply there. You know, and we wonder whether or not this is part of the reverse engineering or just part of the coincidence of life.
Right.
Because it offers Ford and Arthur an opportunity to get off the planet when they realize that they can jump on one of these beasts and go to another location.
They don't know where they're going to go.
No, they have no
but
idea.
They just know it's not going to be there.
And then they have this scene with Thrashbog, who explains that to get the attention of the beast, you have to use a pick-a-bird. This is a colorful bird that has no idea what it's doing.
Right.
And they use the pick-a-bird and the towel, and they jump on the beast. And as they're going out, Arthur yells back, "Where are we going?" And eventually Thrashbog says, "The domain of the king."
Right.
And
right.
we're all intrigued as to what that could mean.
Yes.
And of course, we watch as Arthur and Ford ride the beasts on into another planet. And there on that planet, they find a bar.
Correct. And we're going to jump over to Trisha back on Earth for a minute. And she's having a career crisis, just like the one she had 18 years ago. So she's looking through all this footage of the Grebulons because they brought her up to the planet, if you remember from way back when.
Mm-hmm.
And they wanted her to recalculate the astrology charts from the perspective of Rupert, this new 10th planet where they've been monitoring Earth from.
Mm-hmm.
So she's looking at all this footage that she has, and it all looks like a bad science fiction B movie. It's blurry, it's fuzzy, there's static. And just like 18 years ago when she was an astrophysicist and met a man from another planet, here she's a journalist and she's got the scoop of the century, and none of her footage is usable or believable. Then finally somebody decides to ignore all of her do not disturb messages and said that she has to go to Regent Park because a spaceship with a crazy girl is throwing rocks at people. And when she gets there, she calls her mother. So the book goes back and forth, and it's going to go quicker and quicker, and it's all going to manifest itself into one place.
Mm-hmm.
But the perfectly normal beast did indeed go to the domain of the king, and
which is the name of the bar, right?
Which is the name of the bar.
Mm-hmm.
And outside of it was parked a big pink spaceship.
With fins all over it.
With fins and chrome and all kinds of everything.
Mm-hmm.
And Ford talked to the singer who owned the big chrome pink spaceship and got him to give it to him for the promise of a tip for playing a song.
Mm-hmm.
And the song was Love Me Tender.
Right.
And this time, Arthur did not recognize Elvis, and I do not know how that was possible, no matter how disoriented he was.
Well, I mean, he was the fat Elvis at this point.
Well,
You know,
Yes. And then I like that Ford had to file a review of the restaurant to get the expense claim approved automatically because of the program he hacked into the computer's guide at the office.
Yep.
So the guy at the bar was just like astounded at the amount of money that Ford was going to tip the singer. And he's like, at first the credit card wasn't going through, but then all of a sudden it was like, hey, no problem.
Uh-huh.
And then here's another commentary. This time it's on the news agencies. So Random arrives in a spaceship, and it is sensational news.
Right.
A little while later, Ford and Arthur arrive, and the headline is, another spacecraft. This one's pink. And then Trillian arrives, but it only made the local news.
Right.
So by the third spaceship, it was not even news anymore.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Do you have any idea why Ford, when he was ordering room service, was trying to buy the zoo?
Because he wanted to really... Oh, are you asking a question?
Yes.
Okay. So, for whatever reason, he wanted to release all of the animals. He just felt that they should not be in cages. They should not be allowed to exist for entertainment.
Because of his humanitarian foie gras eating nature?
Well, that's why I was making the joke about hating geese. He hates geese, you know?
Right.
So everybody's got
all the
something
other
he says,
animals
right?
are okay.
Yeah, all the other animals are wonderful. Except, of course, he's the one who tortured the poor giraffes and made them have a long neck, you know?
That's right. That's right.
So maybe he's regretting some of his actions from the past. So he'll probably have sausage for dinner.
Right. Right. Well, we finally get to Stavromula Beta. Well, we get to Stavromula's second club called Beta.
Mm-hmm.
And we learn this from a matchbook dropped by an incarnation of Agrajag who was shot and killed by Random after Arthur ducked.
Right there.
So, finally, they're trying to pull it all in together. And the war that Trillian went to cover after leaving Random with Arthur never happened because the reconnaissance ship never arrived and the rest of the fleet was scattered.
Correct.
Trillian discovered the missing ship is the Grebulons.
Right.
Somehow she knows they are going to do something very bad because they are lost and confused, and she is trying to get everyone to leave.
Right.
So they do some sort of explanation of big gray turret buildings on the ship turning toward Earth, and we've got the Vogon captain is observing everything from a distance.
Yes.
And all of the Earths turn into sausages and then get blinked out of existence.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how a shot from the Grebulon ship that is like, it's not going to be instantaneous. They're too far away for there to be. And all the sausages, and I'm not exactly sure how everything blinked out of existence. Do you have any kind of a cohesive story of how it happened better than is written here?
No, except to say that this is where the guide Mark II is playing into it.
Yes.
So it's really about the guide at this point. And
it sounded like the guide pulled all of the possible Earths into the same universe.
Yes, or something to that effect, and that he was able to collapse the entire chain of probability, or the chain of existence for the Earth, down into one point, like a singularity or something.
Right.
But, of course, we don't know that kind of information, and it's really kind of an interesting thing, because I'm sure you've looked this up or read about it. It was funny because Adam says the one nice thing about ending the series this way is at least he knows where all his characters are.
Right.
So if he should decide to reinvent them or to bring them back to life, he has one point from which he can work,
Except for Zaphod. Zaphod wasn't there.
Well, that's true. Zaphod
is out and about. And he might even have the heart of gold with the infinite improbability drive, so some infinitely improbable thing could bring them back.
That's true. That's 100% true. So, yeah, so he knew that he was ending it, and we are left with the understanding or belief that all of these folks died as the Earth was destroyed, this time by the Grebulons, who thought that the Earth rising in Capricorn was a very bad sign for them. So they decided the Earth should no longer exist, and that way life will be much better.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, this is where we make a couple of assumptions. It's certainly not as bad as, I think I want something to eat. For an ending.
Right. Yeah. Yes.
But, he's definitely hanging out in the bathtub thinking about something else.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's a frenetic pace here at the end,
yes.
of everything that's going on. So
it just seemed to happen way faster than I expected it to.
Right. And we get a couple of cute little jokes in here where Ford manages to buy himself a pair of blue suede shoes.
Right. All the good it'll do him because he was on
really.
the Earth.
It's really fascinating. I mean, well, at least from this perspective, we've come to the end of the story.
Yes. So there's two other things. First was, I like this little final touch with the Grebulon leader who thought that if he destroyed the Earth, he would have a better month.
Right.
And it said, in spite of having taken what he regarded as an extremely positive piece of action, the Grebulon leader ended up having a very bad month after all. It was pretty much the same as all the previous months, except that there was now nothing on television anymore. So all of his entertainment,
monitor, right.
Right. Everything he monitored is gone.
Right. And I do want to point out with the Grebulons, of course, I think you inferred this, but I'll just want to say it out loud here. When Trillian goes to the war that she's going to cover and they discover that the reconnaissance ship is missing, they don't say it out loud, but we understand now where the Grebulons came from. They were the reconnaissance ship that was to be sent with that armada to do the monitoring so that they could prepare for the war.
Yes.
And we didn't really talk about too much about how the Grebulons lost their mind. That the ship as a whole was punched exactly in the wrong spot so that all of the data was lost through the hole of the ship and all that kind of stuff, which is kind of interesting. So that's all part of what we understand now as being the reverse engineering that created this unlikely set of events that destroyed this particular Earth. So that's where we're at with the Grebulons.
Right. And then the last question I have is that the Guide Mark II was on the Earth when it was destroyed. So did it destroy itself?
That's a great question. I'm going to say that just like every other time we've encountered the Mark II here, it collapsed itself from that universe seconds before it was destroyed. And as we know, I think it makes an appearance in front of Vogon Jeltz, doesn't it?
That was another question, I guess, that I had then, which was there a second one? Because it did crumble into dust. It was like its purpose ended. Like, to me, the one that Vogon Jeltz had was a single purpose guide. It wasn't a all forever guide. Like the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy Mark I is a guidebook. You bring it with you everywhere you go.
Right.
These seem to have single purposes. Like the one that Ford took out of the office was to get it to random, to create all this other stuff. But Vogon Jeltz had one too in the ship. And I don't know if that was the same one, but whatever one it was, it crumbled into nothingness.
Right.
So it disintegrated.
Right. This goes back to the suggestion that Zaldago makes about what it is that they've created when they created the Mark II. And he's saying that they sell one guide to 1 billion futures or one guide to 1 billion universes.
Okay, so then that answered my question.
Mm-hmm.
Perfectly, it did.
Mm-hmm.
So the answer was yes, the guide destroyed itself on Earth, which made all the other guides disintegrate because there's only one.
Right. The one guide. And now I do want to kind of leave it a little open-ended here. I don't know whether this is ex post facto or not, but I do want to talk about the destruction of the guide and the effect that would have.
Okay.
But I don't know if I want to talk about it here.
I could not figure out why Vogon Jeltz's guide disintegrated into dust.
Mm-hmm.
But it makes perfect sense if the one guide, the main guide that was in corporate headquarters that was sold to all the billions of universes,
mm-hmm.
and Vogon Jeltz had a guide from another universe that he had with him in this universe.
Right.
When the main one guide that gets sold is on Earth and gets destroyed,
right,
all the other guides would be destroyed because there's only one.
Right. Well, this is where it gets a little sticky, because we're also told that you create a universe by perceiving it.
Correct.
So the one guide that Vogon Jeltz has is the same guide, like you said, that Random has.
Yes.
It's the same guide that Ford had, but it exists in each of these individual universes. So Ford's universe is different than Random's, and Random's universe is different than the Vogon Jeltz's.
When you were talking about all of the other Earths, you said there has to be a 0 point.
Yes. I believe that, but it's clearly not this case.
So to me, it's exactly the same thing. The guide that was on the 13th floor of the office was the 0 point.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, I mean, we can certainly accept that.
And then if that one got destroyed, all the other ones would crumble out of existence because the 0 point, like if Vogon Jeltz's was destroyed, it wasn't the first in the chain. It wasn't the one that was sold.
Right. Infinitum created it, and the first person who touched it was Vogon Jeltz. Or first person who owned it was Vogon Jeltz.
Okay, but it was still in the office. So he didn't get the original. He got the original that was sold in another universe.
Right. So there's a fine line here. I'm not sure how to define it, okay, too sharply, but it existed first for Vogon Jeltz in his universe. So whether it was physically next to him or whether it was sitting in the guide office, it still existed in Vogon Jeltz's universe. Then Ford found it, and it existed for him in his universe until Random found it, and it existed for her in her universe.
Right.
So just like you were saying before about the multiplicity of universes, that's how the guide exists in millions of universes at the same time. So even though it's one, it's a million.
Right. I could accept your explanation like that. I know it was dumbed down for me, but the reason I can't accept it is because when Random got it, Ford didn't have it anymore. Vogon Jeltz still had it, even though Random had it. So there's one that's spawning into other universes, and then there's all the others. So even though Vogon Jeltz had it in his ship, there was still one in the guide.
Right. I think the thing that is sticky here, and I'll say that, is that we're associating its physical location with its existence. And I'm saying no. It exists wherever it wants to exist, as it wants to exist. So even though Vogon Jeltz didn't physically have a copy of the guide sitting in front of him, he still had it in his universe. And so did Ford, even after he lost it to Random. And so did Random, even after the Earth was destroyed. Okay, so clearly the concept of the Guide Mark II is extremely fascinating and faceted,
Yeah.
as we're discussing here. So I really believe, or at least I hope, that you and I can have a conversation and share it with other people, perhaps on the podcast, that really digs into the concept of AI and the concept of robots and how all of these things play into not only Douglas Adams' world, but our world and all of the content that we enjoy in science fiction and movies and all that kind of thing. Because for me, it's a fascinating area of study and understanding.
I think that would be a good idea. And I hope that anybody who tuned into this, who may have had questions about this book, didn't think, wow, I'm going to get some clarity and answers. Because they probably walked away with more questions than they had before starting this. But I will agree that I think this is a good place to end. So say goodbye, Bryan.
Okay, Jeff. I was going to say goodbye, but all I can think about is herring sandwiches.
Okay, me too. Let's go have a sandwich. Thank you for listening to Digital Watches Are a Pretty Neat Idea. Look for us the first Thursday of every month for a full episode. We will also release a bonus episode later in the month. A very special thanks goes out to Luke, Max, Greg, and Tim Lesnick for arranging and performing our opening theme. We would also like to thank our talented friends and family for their voice work on our introductions and commercials. A special thanks this episode to John Lesnick for our opening. A special thanks this episode goes out to Gene Berard for our commercial. We would also like to thank Kelly Lesnick for doing our summary. Visit our website at digitalwatchesareaprettyneatidea.buzzsprout.com, where you can find links to all my Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy inspired t-shirt designs. You can find us on Facebook and YouTube as Digital Watches Are a Pretty Neat Idea, on Instagram as Watches Idea Podcast, and on Twitter at Watches Idea. If you'd like to contact us, our email is digitalwatchespodcast@gmail.com.
This has been a Froods for Thought production.